We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph from Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 34a. On the previous summer, there was a machlokas tanoim in a brisa whether witnesses in a capital case are they allowed to advance arguments on behalf of the defendant. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says they can advance arguments that the defendant is innocent, but not that the defendant is guilty. The Rabbanan said they're not allowed to advance arguments at all. They can only testify. And the Gemara says, "My time with Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda." What is the reason of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda? Why does he say they're allowed to advance arguments lizachus, but they're not allowed to advance arguments lechova? The Omar Krotz, because the pasuk says eid echad lo yana benefesh lomus. It says that eid echad. It says that witness is not allowed to advance these arguments lomus, and we understand from there lomusu de'enu ona. It's only for death. It's only for guilt that the witness is not allowed to advance arguments. Avol lizachus ona. But if he's advancing arguments to clear the person, to say the person is innocent, that is fine according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. V'Rabbanan Amar, v'Rabbanan, and what about the Rabbanan? Amar Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, Mishum demichzi kenogea be'iduso. We don't allow, according to the Rabbanan, we don't allow the witness to advance any arguments, whether it be lezachus or lechova. He cannot advance any arguments for the defendant, because otherwise it looks like he's nogea be'iduso. It looks like he has an interest in his testimony. And Rashi explains, V'Rabbanan da'amri afilu lezachus lo yana. According to the Rabbanan who say that he cannot advance arguments even for innocent, Mishum denogea, that's because he has an interest over here. B'davar shemischaret bo, he regrets something. V'doeg shemiyigmar hadin lechova, maybe he's worried that maybe there will be a verdict for guilt. V'yaviz edim lahazimon, and then maybe the other party is going to bring witnesses and falsify this set of witnesses, meaning himself. Umahader lo matzi hadri behu la'achar kadei dibor. Now they're not able to retract their testimony once the time of toch kadei dibor has passed. The kevan shehiged shuvei nechozer umagid. Once they've testified, you cannot retestify, and so therefore, since he has this situation of nogea beiduso, the Rabbanan say he cannot advance any arguments whatsoever. And the Gemara continues, V'Rabbanan hay lomos my darshibe. Now, what do the Rabbanan do with the word lomos? It seems to be that somebody is not allowed to say something lomos, but can say something for innocence. And the Gemara says to that, mukmilei bi'echad min haTalmidim. The Rabbanan will say that applies to one of the Talmidim. The Talmidim, again, are the ones who are not the actual judges, but they're the students of the judges, so they will not be allowed to say any arguments lomos for chova, for guilt, but they can say arguments for zechus. Kedetanya, as we learn in the Brisa, Amar echad min ha'edim yeshli lalamin olav zechus. If one of the witnesses says that I have a reason for innocence, minayin shein shomin lo, from where do we know that we don't listen to him? Talmud lomer eid echad lo yan. It says that this witness is not allowed to advance any arguments. Minayin le'echad min haTalmidim. Now, how do we know that one of the students, shomer yeshli lalamin olav chova, that if he wants to advance guilt, specifically guilt and not innocence, if he wants to advance reasons for guilt, minayin shein shomin lo, how do we know that in that scenario we don't listen to one of the students? Talmud lomer echad lo yana benefesh lomos. Again, it says lomos, meaning for guilt, for death, that the student is not allowed to advance arguments. And Rashi explains, Muki lo be'echad min haTalmidim avol be'edim lo mesukim mishum negias eidus kedamrinan. Again, we're not going to say that it's talking about witnesses, because according to the Rabbanan, the witnesses cannot testify at all, because it's nogea be'eduso. They have an interest, so to speak, in the case. Talmud lomer echad lo yana benefesh lomos lomosu de'enu ona. Again, we're going to say by the Talmidim, it's only lomos that they cannot advance arguments, but for innocence, they are able to advance arguments. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Dinei nefashos, when it comes to capital cases, hamalamed v'chulu, somebody who originally advanced arguments for innocence is not allowed to advance arguments for guilt, but the other way around is fine. If the judge originally advanced arguments for guilt, he is allowed to go ahead and advance arguments for innocence. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Lo shanu ela b'shas masa umatan. This halacha is only true during the time when the judges are deliberating. Avol b'shas gemar din, but if it's the time of the verdict, so then they could change their minds. Malamed even somebody who originally was advancing arguments for innocence can go ahead and say that he finds the defendant guilty. And the Gemara continues, Meisrei, we have a question from the Mishnah. The Mishnah later on says, L'macharas, the next day, mashkimin uvoin, they get up and they come. Hamizaka omer ani hamizako mizaka ani b'mekomi. The person who originally yesterday said innocent said, I was the one who said innocent, and I continue to say innocent. Hamichayev omer, and the person who said guilty, he says, Ani hamichayev o mechayev ani b'mekomi. I originally said guilty, and I continue to say guilty. Hamelamed chov hamelamed zechus, somebody who originally said guilty can now say innocent. innocent. But the person who originally said innocent is not allowed to come and say guilty. And so the Gemara asks, but if this is already the next day, Gemara Dinu, that's the time of the verdict, and we're still saying that somebody cannot change from innocent to guilty. And the Gemara says it's not a proof at all. According to your reasoning, you think the next day there's no deliberations? There are further deliberations, and there will be a verdict. Ki katani b'shas masa umatan. The Mishnah just means during deliberations you cannot change from advancing an argument of innocence to advancing an argument of guilt. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof. The Mishnah says over there, Donin elo keneged elo ad sheyira echad min hamechayvin divrei hamizak. And again, they judge one against the other until one of the people who said guilty sees that the people who said innocent seem to have a good argument, changes his view. Via misa. So again, if it's true that at the time of the verdict people can change in both directions, listening Nami Ivchot should say the reverse as well. It should say that it's possible somebody who originally thought innocent is going to say guilty. And the Gemara says, Tana azuchus kamahader, achova lo kamahader. It is true that it can go in both directions, but the Mishnah wants to give examples of innocence and is not looking to give examples of guilt. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here the following proof. The Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, because Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, Echad min hatalmidim, if one of the students, Shazika, that originally advanced arguments that the person is innocent, Vameis, and then he dies, Rowan oso ki'ilu chai, we view him as if he's still alive, V'yomid b'makomo, and he's still standing in his place, and he's still saying innocent. And the Gemara says, V'yamai, why do we do that? According to Rav, if at the time of the verdict you can change from innocent and instead advance an argument for guilt, so nemo ilu havik we should say that if the person was still alive, maybe he would have retracted. And the Gemara says to that, Hashta miha lo haderbe. At this point in time, we haven't heard him retract, and that's what Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina is saying. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina does not necessarily go against Rav. But the Gemara says, Vashalcha mitam, but didn't they send a message from over there that Ledivrei Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina motzi mechlau Rabbeinu, that the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina excludes that of Rabbeinu, excludes that of Rav, and actually no, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina is arguing with Rav. And the Gemara says the message was not that, rather the message was Ein Motzi Itmar. Rather, what was stated was Ein Motzi, that Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina does not contradict the opinion of Rav. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Bryce. So Shnei Sofrei Hadayan, and the two scribes of the court, Omdin Lifnei, and they stand before them, Echad min hayamin ve'echad min hasmol, one on the right and one on the left, V'chosvin divrei hamizakin, and they write down the words of the judges who say innocent, V'divrei hamechayvin, and they write down the words of the judges who say guilty. And Rashi explains, Divrei HaMechayvin, they write down the words of the one who says guilty, meaning Ploni Chayev, so-and-so judge, he says Chayev, Umin Hatam Hazeh, and it's for the following reason. And Ploni Zika, and so-and-so, this judge says innocent, Umin Hatam Hazeh, and it's for the following reason. And so the Gemara now brings its proof. Bishlama divrei hamechayvin. I understand why we write down the words of the ones who say guilty, because l'mochar chazu time achrina, because the next day they might have a different reason. They might find a different reason compelling. Ubo lemevad halon asdin, and then we'll need to do what's called halon asdin. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Ela divrei hamizak in my time. But what's the reason of writing all of the words who say innocent, even meaning to say even the reason behind saying innocent? Lav mishum, isn't the reason why we're writing that down that if they see some other reason, they find some other reason compelling, lechova for guilt, lo mashkachinan buhu. The whole point is we're writing down that reason. This way we won't pay attention to what they are saying, and that goes against Rav. They can't change from innocence to guilt. And Rashi explains, B'shlama divrei hamechayvin, I understand why we're writing down the words of the judges who say guilty. Boi lemichtav b'yom rishon, you're going to have to write that down on day one of the proceedings. V'afagav demotzi lemahader, and even though it's possible that a person can retract from guilt to innocence, divo'inan leida lemochar hataimin, because it's important to know the next day what the reasons are that they gave yesterday for saying guilty. Mishum di'ihader bechad minayu mitayim akama, because if one of the judges changes his mind from his original reasoning when he said chayiv, umechayiv leilamachar mitayim achrina, now the next day he says chayiv for a different reason, boy lemahader. So then what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go back. Umiboy halon asdin b'tayim basra. We're going to have to wait overnight with regards to this second reason, ulay yachzor bo halayla, because you have to give him a night to change his mind. In other words, let's say you have a situation where the person had a reason to say guilty on day one, and then on day two he comes up with a different reason, but also to say guilty. We need to know the reasons, because now that we see it's a different reason, you're going to need another overnight in order to see if he changes his mind. So it makes sense that you have to write down all the words of the mechayvin. And Rashi continues, "Ela divrei hamizakin," but writing down all the words of the judge who says innocent, even the reason. Im isa diyachol achzar bo. If Rav was correct that the next day at the time of the verdict he's able to change his mind, he can go from saying innocent to saying guilty. Lama li lemichtavinu. What's the point of writing it down together with the reason, as we'll see in a moment? Imisham shas masa umatan delamacher. If the reason we're writing it down is because of the deliberations the next day, hamilsa bialmahi kadeshi yachazer achar azchus, and the only reason we're writing it down is because if they see that the day before this judge says innocent, it's going to give them a reason to pursue innocence. So lichtov ploni zika. So all you need to write down is so and so said innocent that day. You don't need to write down his reason. Just say the judge said innocent, and that will encourage them to say innocent the next day. Lama li lemichtav taima. What's the point of writing down the reason why he said innocent? If he's allowed to change his mind, there really is no point to writing down the reason. Elalav misham. Rather, isn't the reason why we're writing down the reason why he said innocent? It's because Rav is not correct. Really, if he changes his mind, we would not listen to him. He's not allowed to reverse his opinion. Hilkach, therefore, boy lemichtav taima, we do need to write down the reason why he said innocent. Delo ninshie lataima, we don't want his reason to be forgotten. V'nema bedavar shat tzidukin modim bo hayisitoa, because then what he might say is that he actually made a mistake in something simple in a pasuk, something that even the tzidukin agree to. That is the one situation where he certainly could change his mind. And so you have a situation here where in general he's not able to change his mind the next day, but there's one scenario where he could change his mind if it's a davar shat tzidukim modim bo, and so it's important we write down the reason that he gave so we know that it is not something that the tzidukin admit to, and we know he can't change his mind. But again, if he's able to change his mind at the time of the verdict, like Rav says, there really is no point of writing down that he said innocent and also adding on the reason that he said innocent. And the Gemara continues and answers, lo, no, that is not the reason why we are writing down both the fact that he said innocent and the reason that he gave. The actual reason is, kedei shelo yomru shnayim tam echad mishnei mikros. The reason is we want to make sure that you don't have two judges saying the same reason but from a different source, from two separate psukim, because if they do that, one of them is certainly wrong. It can't be that the same idea comes from two separate psukim, and therefore we would only count that as one vote and not two votes. Kedeboy minei Rabbi Asi min Rabbi Yochanan, it's like Rabbi Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan, Amru shnayim tam echad mishnei mikros. Mao, if two people say one reason from two separate psukim, what's the halacha? Amar lei said to him, ein monin lohen ela echad. We can only count that once, because again, one of them is surely wrong. You're not going to learn the same thing from two separate psukim. And the Gemara continues, Menahani mili, from where do we know this, that two psukim are not going to teach one idea? Amar Abaya, Abaya says, Damar Kra, because the pasuk says, Achas diver elokim shtayim zu shamati ki oz lelokim. It says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks once, and two things I can hear. Mikra echad yotze lekamatayim. It means to say one pasuk can teach us a number of different things, a number of reasons. V'ein tam echad yotze mikamikros. But you're not going to have one thing, one idea come out of several psukim. And the Gemara continues with another source for this idea. Dvei Rabbi Shmuel Tanan, the yeshiva Rabbi Shmuel, they taught, Uchefatish yifutza sela. It's like a hammer that breaks apart the stone. Mapatish zeh mischalek lechamid nitzotzo. It's just like a hammer. It can break the stone into many fragments. Af mikra echad, so to one pasuk yotze lekamatayim. It can teach a number of things. And the Gemara continues, Hechi dami tam echad mishnei mikros. What would be an example of learning one thing from two different psukim? Amar Rav Zavid says, Kiretanan, it's like we learned in the following Mishnah. Mizbeach mekadesh es haroy lo. We know that the Mizbeach can sanctify something that is fit for the Mizbeach. This is talking about something that shouldn't have lechatchila been brought on the Mizbeach, but once it's brought on the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down. It stays on the Mizbeach. And there's a machlokas tanoim, what exactly is going to be considered a ro'y lo. Rabbi Yoshua says, Kol haroy li'ishim, anything that's fit to be burned on the Mizbeach, im ola lo yered, if it goes up, once it goes up on the Mizbeach, it shouldn't come down. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, ha'ola al mokta ma'ola shi ru'uya li'ishim, talks about the ola, just like an ola, something that is burned, im also lo tered, once it goes up, it doesn't come down from the Mizbeach. Av kol shu roy li'ishim, so too, anything that's fit for the fire, im ola lo yered, once it goes up, it doesn't come down. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Gamliel says, kol haroy le'mizbeach, it doesn't have to be fit to be burned on the Mizbeach, it just has to be fit to go on the Mizbeach. Im ola lo yered, once it goes up, it does not come down. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, hi ha'ola al mokta al ha-mizbeach. Again, the pasuk says, ha'ola al mokta al ha-mizbeach ma'ola shi ru'uya legave mizbeach. It just means that just like an ola is fit to be on the Mizbeach, im also lo tered, once it goes up, it doesn't come down. Af kol shu roy le-mizbeach, so to anything that's fit for the Mizbeach, im ola lo yered, once it goes up, it does not come down. And the Gemara continues with Tarvayu Mai Kamarbu. Now both of them, meaning Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Gamliel, what are they coming to include? Psulin, let's say you bring something up that was disqualified. Let's say it was disqualified in the Azara. Mar Maisi Lami Mokta. One is learning that stays on the Mizbeach from the word Mokta. Umar Maisi Lami Mizbeach, and one learns from Mizbeach, meaning Mokta indicates it's something that's fit to be on the fire. Mizbeach just indicates it's something to be fit to go on the Mizbeach. So you have two separate psukim essentially teaching the same thing. But the Gemara continues, it's not true. Actually, in that case, they really argue. Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua are not agreeing. It's not just that they're arguing over the pasuk that is the source. They're actually arguing practically. To Katani Seifa, because it says over there at the end, Ein bein divrei Rabbi Gamliel and divrei Rabbi Yehoshua. There is no difference between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. Ela hadam v'hanasachim, except there is a difference in the following two cases: blood and also libations. They both go on the mizbeach, but they're not burned. Rabbi Gamliel Omer lo yerdu. Rabbi Gamliel would say it's fit for the mizbeach; it doesn't come down. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer yerdu, but Rabbi Yehoshua would say it does come down because that's not something that's burned on the mizbeach. And Rashi explains that saroilo, something that is fit for the mizbeach, stays on the mizbeach. It just has to be something that at some point in time earlier was fit for the mizbeach. It explains that this comes to exclude kemotzim, that's the fistfuls by the karban mincha. If they weren't sanctified in a vessel, that's not even near a kvar lemizbeach. That actually would come down. But other kinds of disqualifications, like pigul, or the blood was spilled, or it's shechted with some kind of machshava that is disqualifying, im alu lo yerdu, in all those cases, once they go on the mizbeach, they don't come down. V'hasam mefarish taima, there the reason is explained, shayapsulan bakodesh kolomar shenifsulu ba'azara, because those disqualifications happened in the kodesh, meaning the disqualification happened in the azara. That's why it stays on the mizbeach. And again, the Gemara then brought the machlokas between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua, but the Gemara said actually Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua are arguing practically as well, and therefore this is not a good example of one idea learned from two different psukim. And so the Gemara continues, Elamar of Papa, rather if Papa says Kidatanya, it's like we learned in the following brisa. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, Mitoch Shenemar, since it says, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Dalid Amid Beis.